Hello everybody and welcome to the Coaches Show here on 90.1 KBPK and SportsNetUSA.net. I'm Noah Alvarez, and for the finale of this season's Coaches Show, I'll be joined by Ryan Osborne, Mark Pavlovich, Joseph Pavlenko, and Victor Vasquez as we recap and review all the fall sports here at Fullerton College.
Yeah, no, and when you start off with Fullerton College athletics, I think you kind of can build to a crescendo. So let's start it off with golf. Golf ended up having a few different athletes who got themselves to state mark, and when you look at this golf squad, in recent years they haven't necessarily made the biggest noise, but this year they had someone finish in the top 30.
Well, and when you look at the golf team, I mean, it's never been abundant here at Fullerton College, so it is an individual sport. No, when you look at an individual sport, not a team sport, because they don't have enough people to compete in the OEC as a golf team. They need to attack it as individual athletes.
Yeah, only 3 players on their roster, and it's a first-year head coach too, but we're seeing that golf program turn into the right direction.
Yeah, and Jerry Deville kind of, we'll say, Mark, when you talk about these athletes not necessarily having enough people on the squad to be able to compete at the OEC championships, Jerry Deville really had the opportunity to go to state and kind of represent Fullerton College. She finishes number 26 overall in the entire state at those championships. So even though the team doesn't necessarily have an overall squad that can compete at the OEC level, they do have a representative.
Yeah, when you look at what she shoots, she basically shoots in the 80s. That's what she did when she got to states and everything else. I think she shot an 83 and an 86. Our golfers are still those golfers that are learning, so when they go to the next level, the NCAA level, they're going to have to be able to shoot in at least the mid-70s if they want to compete, or the low 70s when you look at it, because then you're getting closer to that range of the LPGA player and the national champions in amateur golf.
So let's go ahead and transition to another fall individual sport. Let's take it over to cross country, where the men's team, they had 2 runners compete in the state tournament, both Ian Rusk and Mauro Rosales, both players representing the men's cross-country team at the state championship, and the women's team competed up to the Orange Empire Conference Championship.
Yeah, and when you look at Mauro Gonzalez and then Ian Rusk, both of them, when they go up to state, they end up finishing in the top 80 in the entire state. And when you see how many athletes ended up being sent out to state up north, it's pretty nice to be able to see Fullerton College kind of slot in there in the top half of all the competition. When you look at the women's team, Mark, they do finish at the OEC championships. They ended up getting, if I remember correctly, 21st.
Yeah, and when you talk to Gina Bevick about the cross-country program, it's once again finding those strange athletes that want to compete. I mean, I ran cross-country. It's a crazy sport to start with, and you really have to find that dedicated runner that wants to compete in that level, because guys, it's not just running 600 yards, you're running a few miles on the cross-country level.
Well, Mark, when you talk about that, a lot of the times that we're out here on the Coaches Show, we're running over to football and talking to different football athletes, and they are athletes. They're well built for their craft, and they train for their craft. But when you look at cross-country athletes, they have to prepare themselves mentally for months at a time for a single race. When you look at football, you have the opportunity to go out there and practice each and every day for that weekend. When you look at cross-country, you have to be able to prepare yourself mentally and physically for a single race, which could be months, perhaps even close to a year up ahead.
Yeah, I only need to correct you on one thing. Nobody in this group has ran anything.
No,
Well, you said we ran over the football field.
Brisk walk.
Yeah,
Brisk walk.
just a nice walk.
It was a power walk.
Being a cross-country runner is something where it's that individual dedication.
And both those leaders on the cross-country team for the men's side, Ian Rusk and Mauro Rosales, both of them are sophomores, and both of them competed at the state tournament last year. So it's good to see them advance on, but they had a really spectacular career here at Fullerton College. Now let's switch it up to a sport that we were covering quite a bit in the fall season, the women's volleyball team led by head coach Megan Glennie. She had the team finishing 16-10 overall in the year, and Victor, you and I got to cover those games a lot, but who really stood out for you on that team?
There's a few players, Noah. For me, you got to go Sailor Frew. She just led the team with over 330 kills. She's actually second all-time in Fullerton College history. She just put on a show every time she was on the court, especially when another player I wanted to mention was Sam Longstreet. After she went down with her injury, she had to do even more for her team to kind of help out and just try to force that Fullerton College team to make it into the playoffs, which they ended up doing after winning those 3 games at the end of the season.
But when you look at this volleyball team, you almost have to look at it, Mark, Noah, Joseph, Victor. You have to look at it as a season that had a ton of different peaks and a lot of different lows. Because you start off the season, this volleyball team didn't look its greatest. And then all of a sudden, midway through, they go on a 9-match winning streak. They follow that up by losing 3 out of 4 to finish off conference. And then they get into the state playoff after winning 2 straight matches and end up losing in 5 sets after leading it 2-0. So you look at this entire volleyball season, it's successful for many reasons, including going to playoffs, having records set, having different all-conference players, but the consistency wasn't there for Fullerton.
Well, I talked to Longstreet and Frew, and one of the problems with the volleyball team is they didn't know how to have a killer instinct. We saw Orange Coast come in, killer instinct. We saw Irvine Valley, killer instinct volleyball teams. And the championship teams really do know how to finish somebody off. I don't know how many games that we did on video, guys, but we would talk off camera and sit there and look at each other, and we would watch the team win that important 3rd set, and then we'd wait for them to collapse. And Noah, you were the voice for women's volleyball. More than once it looked like they should have beat somebody, and then all of a sudden it came down to that vital 15-point last set, and they just disappeared on the court.
That's something you expect out of a young team. There was only 3 sophomores that were actively playing on that roster. Victor mentioned both of them, Sailor and Sam. The other third one was Priscilla Gutierrez. She played the libero position. And those 3 sophomores really kind of carried the load. And you saw they were the only vocal points when Sam Longstreet went down with their injury. Well, then who was going to be that vocal leader in the middle in the middle blocker position to really kind of step up and make some plays outside of Sailor Frew? But I think if you look at the talented freshmen, a lot of them got good playing experience. So if you're a coach on the volleyball team, or if you're a returning player coming back for next year and going into beach volleyball, I think you have a lot of confidence because freshmen like Faith Webb, Mackenzie Genstad, Riley Vio all played really significant minutes, including the setters Chloe Johnson and Karen Delgadillo. All of them got really good playing time against really top-ranked teams, so I think they're going to come back even stronger next season.
But I think when you also look at volleyball, it's not just about the players on the court here at KVPK. It's the fact that we were able to go out there and make sure that we got them as much coverage as possible. Joseph, you and I both here at KVPK, making sure that we ended up giving as much light to not just men's sports, but also women's sports here on campus.
Yeah, and talking about volleyball players, all of you mentioned Sam Longstreet and her injury, but she was I'm going to say it was a beast, maybe a little foolish with it being her sophomore year, but not letting that injury stop her, wanting to finish the season, wanting to try to, if through nothing else, force of will, get her team into and through the playoffs. And I think not having that killer instinct is kind of a through line that I think a couple of our fall teams, if we talk about them, just not being able to finish it, it's a point that unfortunately is going to come up a couple times.
And that's something that Joseph mentioned too, is like how Sam kind of projected to her team, like, you know what, I do have an injury. I could be risking my future playing volleyball, but I'm willing to kind of help out as much as I can to help this team make the playoff. And that's something that could spread to the freshmen, like Noah mentioned, for next year. A lot of the young talent like Karen Delgadillo that can just kind of hopefully spread that kind of message to the rest of the team, the newcomers that are coming into Fullerton, let them know, like, hey, this is how we have to have, this is the type of culture that Coach Megan Glennie has kind of set up for us, and that we're willing to fight for each other in practice and in games. You know, whoever you're playing, whether it's Irvine Valley College or, you know, Santiago Canyon, whoever it is.
Well, I want to thank you guys for being the voices of women's volleyball here on 90.1 KBPK. It's been a ball this year. You guys have had a great time. I think all 5 of us have had an opportunity to see some excellent volleyball.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the women came up just a little short. But in somebody's mind, I'm going to go to you to let you move us on to the next sport. Do you think they reached their plateau and did better than you thought they would because you were there for almost every game, or do you think they came up a little short?
I think they peaked a little bit too early, and then once they had that loss to Irvine Valley, granted, Irvine Valley was the #1 team in the state for the entire season. They actually just lost the state championship not too long ago, this past weekend. So when you look at that loss, it kind of did a number on them, and you could see their youth in the following games. Once they got another team that had a little bit more veterans, whether it was Cypress, whether it was Riverside, whether it was OCC, once they kind of imposed their will, they kind of backed off and didn't go head-to-head with them, and that's where they missed Sam Longstreet when she was out with their injury. Sailor Frew can do only so much for that team. They just peaked at the wrong time during the middle of the season instead of towards the end. But if they were riding that hot streak towards the end, I think it could have been different in the playoffs.
And before you move on, Noah, I also want to go back to what Mark was talking about, going out there and covering these games. All 5 of us were out there. We also want to thank Megan Glennie and Philip Tomancic for being such gracious hosts with us. They talked with us. They made sure that they did interviews prior to games, after the games, made sure that their players were available as well, and also making sure that we were comfortable out there at Colleen Riley Court in terms of the technical aspect.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and switch it over to the pitch here at Fullerton College, and let's cover both of the soccer teams. Both of them got to make the playoffs. The men's team, they got to win Orange Empire Conference after a dominant season. Head coach Greg Aviles won Orange Empire Conference Coach of the Year as well, and 7 players were named to that Orange Empire Conference all-county team, all conference teams.
Indeed, and when you look at this men's soccer team, I think you really have to look at their attacking front. They had 4 different players who finished with over 15 points throughout the season. And when you look at this Fullerton College team, the season was still pretty much in the air towards the final weekend of Orange Empire Conference play. They had to take on Golden West at home for the right to have the Orange Empire Conference title. The winner of that game would end up moving on into the playoffs. Joseph and I were out there covering Fullerton College soccer, making sure that they got coverage of that Orange Empire Conference championship when it happened. They did end up winning by a final of 1-0. If you're looking at Fullerton College in terms of their overall season, you have to be able to respect that Orange Empire Conference play that they had. If it wasn't for their Orange Empire Conference tear, they don't make it into the postseason.
Well, and one of the things when you look at soccer too, you talk about all the attackers that they have on there, but you win at soccer, and I'm going to go back to my hockey partner to my right. You win by a hot goalie who can keep you in the games, because for the simple reason, you play against somebody that can score on you at will, you better have some really outstanding young men up front. You've got to keep those games 2-1, 3-2, maybe want to run away at a 4-3 game occasionally. But the goalies who's kept them in all year long, and that's one thing. They played excellent defense. They had the speed to match anybody when you watched them. And talk about feistiness. That was a feisty men's soccer team that refused to lose. And I think that attitude demonstrated all the way in to when they made the playoffs. Both you, all 3 of you were out there. That feistiness is what got them to the playoffs, and then they tried to carry it over into the playoffs. And if they could have just been maybe a little more nastier out there, they might have walked away with a lot more when the playoffs went on.
Yeah, they ended up falling short to Oxnard College in the second round of their Southern California regional playoffs. You mentioned the goalies, Mark, but I'm going to go ahead and highlight that back line. All the center backs and the right backs, whether it was Marco Polo, Manny Tovar, Brian Martinez, all 3 of those players in the back line for Fullerton College, they all got all conference awards at the end of the season. So it was really that entire defensive unit with the back line, the goalie, and they had a really special attack too. And we were there for that Bakersfield College game. It almost seemed that they had a lot of confidence going into it, Victor. We were talking about it. A lot of players like Polo, like Alejandro Castillo and Kentrell Dorsey, they weren't in the starting lineup. Coach Avila is kind of rolling the dice a little bit and going with a little bit of some second stringers.
We even discussed it during the broadcast of how confident Coach Aviles was, kind of not having his usual starters in the lineup. But it goes back to what Mark mentioned. They're feisty and they're resilient. They had over 8 games where they scored their goals in the second half, sometimes coming in the last few minutes of their game. So it just shows you that, yes, they're not, you move around, they have a lot of substitutions, but it just shows that Aviles can plug in whichever player he wants, and they are ready, and they know what role they have to do.
I'll just comment, like, they have a little bit on the attacking third of the Fullerton College's soccer team, and I think their weapons up on the attacking third definitely had that killer instinct, definitely wanted to go and score the goal and get the game-winning goal. And sometimes that was to their detriment, I think. I think sometimes a player would maybe hang on to a ball for a touch or two too much, not feed it to the center. Definitely when we were out there, it seemed to be, on occasion, a frustration of the head coach. And I think just feeding the center maybe a little bit sooner could have maybe changed some things up, given them a couple more scoring opportunities.
And I think when you talk about that, what we saw in the final game of the regular season, the Orange Empire Conference Championship, unofficially, but the winner of that game would be the champion in the Orange Empire Conference. We saw that game, we saw the postseason, in which both times Fullerton College fully sold out into getting the ball to Contrell Dorsey. And if it wasn't going to Dorsey, their offense wasn't working at all. And I think that, like you said, yes, it worked for them during the season. And Contrell is a sensational player, and he finished as one of the better players in all of Southern California. But you have to have someone who can step up when the offense isn't necessarily clicking at all cylinders. And in the playoffs, in that final game of the regular season, they do win it on a Contrell Dorsey goal. But there was no other offense for Fullerton College in those two games.
So when we look at the men, they did well. The women on the other side, interesting season, even though they make the playoffs too. But an interesting season because we all saw the women play. Sometimes I think, and I'm going to go back to you because you guys were out for the women's team there too, Noah. Women a little more haphazard than the men when they played the game. And I know when we were all on the table together, you, Ryan, and I, it was basically more get the ball down the field and let's hope for the best. And I know that sounds disparaging, but that's what I saw here for all the teams they played against on the community college level.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the fact the women's soccer team, they were plagued with injuries this season. When we were out for that one game that we did against Cypress College, Pam Lewin was telling us 2 of her top 4 players were out with injuries and they were done for the rest of the season. One of those being Regina Sanchez-Molina, who still ended up finishing first team all-conference. So that just shows how much respect she had amongst the conference for what she did in the preseason and at the beginning of conference play. Nonetheless, that game we went to against Cypress College, a team that's really dominated the soccer landscape for the past, couple of years, almost the past decade. And
Wins
this
the OEC championship for the first time for a team not named Santiago Canyon in the last 17 years, in fact.
But they went toe-to-toe all game long with Cypress College, despite being shorthanded. They finished that game 0-0, so it was a defensive slugfest between both those teams. But they went on to go play first round of the regional playoffs too, where they did fall short to San Bernardino Valley College in a penalty shootout. So they were going down to the wire, just like the men's team did in the first round of the playoffs.
You know, I always think that's a fair penalty shootout. I'm sorry, as a soccer guy, I think we need to just say, hey, let's win the game outright and then go to the next thing, just like we're heading for the next sport here on 90.1 KBPK.
The enunciation is terrific.
It is, and that transition, smooth as silk.
Speaking of smooth as silk, let's head over to the Hornets' Nest, where both teams for the Fullerton men's basketball team and the women's basketball team are just getting started. Both teams about 10 games into their season, but we had the chance to catch up with not only Perry Webster, but also Marsha Foster. And we've been to both of their games, covering both of their games at least a couple times already in this early season. Obviously, it's hard not to mention Perry Webster's team coming off a state championship, and it seems like a completely new team. Sure, he has 2 players returning from last year's squad that got significant minutes. You want to count maybe the third and Ronnie Stapp, who had the season cut short with an injury. But nonetheless, it's a brand new team, and already right at the gates, they're playing very strong in the year.
They're playing strong because Perry Webster teaches one thing. Defense, defense, defense. You have to stop the other team from playing. And if you watch them, they play man-to-man. Very rarely do they play a zone defense. They may go into it for a second, but they move their feet well, they use their wingspans for their hand, they shift, they play great team defense, which he teaches, and what they do is their offense comes off the defense. They rebound the ball. So far this season, they have out-rebounded everybody they have played against. And when you clean the boards and you take teams that supposedly are great offensive squads and you shut them down, you should win a basketball game, and that's what Perry Webster teaches.
Indeed, Mark, but when you also look at Marsha Foster's squad, this is a revamped team. We've seen in recent years Marsha Foster's squads not necessarily getting into the postseason, but you look at last year specifically, they get back into the postseason for the first time in 4 years. Now all of a sudden this year they've had a decent start to this season. And all of a sudden you're looking at this team with very different prospects. And Noah, you actually got to talk to Marsha Foster after their last win.
Okay, thanks for that. Wow.
Good
that
talk,
was a
Noah.
fast break, and he just kicked it out of bounds.
Yes, let's go ahead and toss it over. What am I supposed to...
We thought you were going to talk about the last game in your conversation. You know, you interviewed Marsha Foster.
Yeah.
You remember this?
Yes.
When did that happen?
We're gonna play it after. That's what he said. Leave a break. So I thought we were gonna leave a pause.
So here's where we will take that pause. Let's go right out to Marsha Foster.
I'm here with head coach Marsha Foster after your team's big performance over Antelope Valley College tonight. And coach, I got to ask, because Antelope Valley had 2 leading scorers, averaging over 25 points combined. You held both of those players to only 15. In fact, one of those was only held to 0 points on the night. Was that part of your game plan going into this game?
Well, we wanted to make the game more difficult for number 5, Naya. She's a nice player. She found a way, though, to get loose on us. Yeah, I mean, we're always aware of who the leading scorers are, and we want to do a good job on them. That's an area we're working to get better at. So, yeah, I was really pleased with the effort on number 1.
So we caught up before the season, too, and you mentioned that your defense was that area that needs improvement. But it seemed like the different defensive schemes that you used tonight really threw that offense off for Antelope Valley. How impressed and how confident are you in your defense right now at this point of the year?
Okay, we still have a lot of work to do. I like the effort, and because we change up, it's confusing us less and confusing the other team more, which is a good sign. I think we can get better and better at our pressure, and then how we respond, how we convert after pressure has to be better. So I was pleased with a lot of stuff today, especially the offensive rebounds. We only gave up 11, I believe, or 12, and that's good for us because we've been struggling in that area.
And then flip it over for you guys on the offensive rebounds. You guys finished with 15. Angie Zendejas had 3. Shanice West had 4. But it seemed like everyone was getting in on the offensive rebounds. How important is that for your offense going forward?
We've got to have a hunger for the ball. We have to have that mindset where we need another possession if we don't score on the first. And there are certain people that can do that. Angie Zendejas it can be a really, really special player. She sees stuff and she passes before it happens sometimes, but when the game slows down for her, she's going to be so much better. And Shanice West, she boards well for us, and she had some spectacular looking boards tonight. But Janelle Ramos was a really nice presence for us offensively tonight and defensively. So I'm really just pleased with how we're starting to grow on the inside.
Janelle was another player I wanted to highlight. 12 points, she finished, and it was important too because in the first half she missed her first 2 buckets, but then your team continued to feed her down low, and she really got her confidence going. How important is that confidence going forward for her to be a dominant post player the rest of the season?
Well, big time. I mean, because Janelle is a really, really smart player. And she understands the game, I think, and she gets more confident because it takes her a couple possessions to get confident playing at this level. But she can finish. You can see she can also shoot the ball from the outside. We want her to shoot the ball a lot more. So her growth is really important to our success.
All right, well, thank you very much and best of luck.
Thank you very much.
We're back here at 90.1 KBBK. I've got my forward and my center, my guard, and my shooting guard at the end of the room. But we're going to leave basketball. We're going to move on because when we talk defense, we talked about Perry Webster. You talk about defense. One sport that really played defense this year was, once again, the national champions that came to Fullerton College. And these just seems like that's a natural thing to say. No, we're not talking football. We're talking the women in water polo and Gabriel Martinez's team. I tell you what, talk about a coach that's feisty, nasty, mean, and he'll agree with all those up there. You better work hard, you better bust your tail if you want to be a champion. And we were out at the pool, all of us got to watch the young women play. Ryan Osborne and I were looking at the record. They said they had 3 losses this year. Right, Noah?
32-3.
One was to Riverside. One was to the Filipino national team. And one was to Azusa Pacific, an NAIA team. You looked at me and said, wait a minute, if you're actually going to score it right, they didn't have.
Loss.
They had 1 loss.
A single loss at the community college level. Mark, when you talk about that, there are not many coaches in all of water polo. And I'm talking around the world. I'm not talking about community college or maybe even the Division I level. I'm talking about in the world that would respect that record. But Gabriel Martinez does, because he feels that any competition that his girls go into, that's a competition that they should win. When they took on the Philippine national team, it was a 14-13 loss. They lost by 1 goal, and that team, I'm talking about Gabriel Martinez, the Hornets had just played Mount Sac, one of the better teams in Southern California, and they immediately went into the Philippine national squad. Back to back with less than 30 minutes in between both of those two games. Yes, it's a loss, 14-13, but there are not many coaches around the world who would respect that as a loss when you're at the community college level.
And Noah, you were out there for that game, and he didn't really put in his number one squad against the Filipino team. He decided to rest most of his gunners and ended up putting in his, what is it called, the white squad, or the white squad that he puts in, which is basically his second squad. You were out there watching that game, so a loss with your second group in the water.
And you see that depth come handy in the playoffs, because in that state tournament against Sierra College, in the semifinals, we saw them want to make a substitution. He subbed all 6 of his girls out, put a new 6 into the pool, and to be able to have that depth, especially at the community college level too. We were at a few games where there was a state tournament, or at that game where there was a doubleheader between both the men's and the women's team when they played the Philippine national team. You look at the other benches and their size. After the 6 girls are in the pool for the other teams, they maybe have 4, maybe 3 girls on the bench. Not Fullerton College. They had over 10 players on the bench when they had a full squad in the pool. So it just goes to show the depth that Gabriel Martinez here. And if you're a really good water polo player in the area, you're going to want to come to play for Gabriel Martinez.
Well, I tell you what, it was a gutsy move, because he took them out because he wasn't happy with them.
Yep.
In the semifinals, you lose that game, your season's done. And he took them out and sat his starters down because he didn't like the way they were participating.
And not only that, Mark, but let's also look at who they were playing. Sierra from up north. And you may be thinking, here in Southern California, where's Sierra College? I have no idea where that place is. Never even heard of it. Well, I'll tell you what, that's the team that beat Gabriel Martinez last year in the state final for the championship game. So he plays them again this year in the state semifinals, knowing that this is the same squad that beat him the prior year, and he still had the opportunity and, as you said, the guts to be able to say, you know what, I'm not happy with our starters, you're gone, I'm going to bring you back in later.
Yeah.
But it's things like that that I think led to Gabriel Martinez being named the Coach of the Year again.
Second time in his career that he's been named that, because when Fullerton beat Sierra, they had to go to the state final, and they had to play Riverside for, what, the 100th time? 700th time during this season? But really, Fullerton's only loss at the community college level was against Riverside City College, and they had to play again, the 6th time that they had played each other, and yet Fullerton would win that. They would win the state championship here in Southern California at Golden West College, the second title since 2014 for Gabriel Martinez and this entire squad.
Yeah, and they won on a last-second shot by Brianna Santis. She won the Orange Empire Conference MVP the last 2 seasons, and she's been really a special player. And it's her sophomore year, so she goes out and finishes her Fullerton College career with a bang. But she was really that go-to player for the Hornets, not just her sophomore season, but her freshman season as well. You knew it was going to be a special year for head coach Gabriel Martinez, because he returned 6 of his 8 top scorers from last year's team, a team that, like you said, came up just short to Sierra in the state finals. That he brought him 6 of those top 8 scorers back this year. So you had a lot of experience, a lot of girls that were hungry that remember that loss, and obviously they put it to use in this season.
Unfortunately, on the men's side, they're trying to forget all their losses. So I just want to say, we do have a men's water polo team. That's our segment on them.
And I was going to say, with the depth that Noah was saying, the women's water polo team has. He may be losing, what were you saying? He has 6 players moving on, but with the depth on that bench, he has a bunch of freshmen that are going to be coming back that had a taste at winning. And I'm sure, like anybody, you're in it to win it. And if you did it once, you want to do it again.
Yes.
Yes.
Indeed.
I knew that.
Winning is fun.
I'll be there in a little.
I can doggy paddle in the pool.
So it was a lot of fun watching the women's water polo team here win the state championship here at Fullerton College. It's a shame we weren't there for that finals game, and we weren't able to jump in the pool and join the team as their celebration, as Martinez and the athletic trainers and the entire staff there got to enjoy the celebration. But let's go ahead and move to the final sport, the final fall sport here at this semester that we covered, the Fullerton College football team, led by head coach Garrett Campbell. And this year, obviously going into the season, it's worth mentioning, they didn't have the same kind of recruits coming into the season due what happened to last year.
Well, they were still on probation. We'll just be very honest about that. And the CCCAA and the SFCA or the SCFA, whatever it is, because I don't really care. Once again, shame on both you organizations for banning Fullerton College, and shame on you for not doing what you should do for student athletes around California in general. I'll put it that way. For me, a very disappointing football season when you look at what they did. Yeah, they could have won conference, but Ryan Osborne, they started off dismal, to say the least. And all we kept hearing was, just hold on, just hold on. It's like waiting in line at Disneyland for that ride, and then it breaks down, and they tell you to come back next year. That's what our football team was like.
And I'd have to agree with you, Mark. I think that when you look at Fullerton College, you know, a lot of people think of the Division I football or college football level. There are certain schools that have a legacy, and if you can't continue that legacy, well, it's very disappointing. If you have 2 losses at some schools, it's a failed season. I think that if you look at Fullerton College historically, it's the same kind of program here at Fullerton. People expect Fullerton to win, plain and simple. And when you have a national title in 2016, another one in 2017, one that should have gone to Fullerton last year because they finished the year undefeated and beating the top 4 teams in the state at one point or another. When you have 3 straight seasons like that, and all of a sudden you turn to this year and you have more than 4 losses, that's not just a disappointment. That is almost catastrophic for Fullerton College coming off of the great success they've had in the last 3.
And Noah, let's look at it. As much as we're saying negative things, look at all the young men that made all conference for that football team.
Yeah, 15 players made all conference, and so let's just go ahead and start with Josh Rango, one of the more talented players that we've seen come through Fullerton College. He won Defensive Player of the Year, Conference Defensive Player of the Year, making it the 5th straight year that Fullerton College has had one of their defensive players win that award, and the 3rd straight year that Coach David Robinson has had a defensive lineman win that award too. Really explosive, really disruptive, coming from that nose tackle position. And it wasn't just him. It was Cameron Proctor. It was Troy McDonald. It was Jesse Bediaco. It was all these players on the defensive line making plays for Fullerton College. One of the strengths of that team, it was relatively young everywhere else. I mean, we got to spend a lot of time with Coach Gardner, the offensive line coach here at Fullerton College. That was arguably the youngest position group of this Fullerton College squad. And you know more than anybody, you win in the trenches. And if you can't control the trenches, which Fullerton College really struggled with in the beginning of the season, well, then it's going to be really hard to win games.
And, you know, when you think about the defensive backs with Coach Bazizzle, I mean, the biggest thing that we look at is, yeah, you could talk about Xavier, but they didn't have anybody spectacular as a defensive back this year that we knew would do something like we had in the past. And so I think when you look at Brian Crooks' defense, they were good. Not great, but they were good. And if you look at the offensive side, well, that's the peanut butter, and then you put a little jelly on, and that's the season.
I think so, Mark. And when you look at that defense, you mentioned it, the defensive backs in previous years, when you had a guy like D'Angelo who was here, and at the same time you had Javon Burris, you had Xavier Chisholm, who were all back there, joined by D'Angelo. You could look at that defense and say, all right, what is it, the second quarter? They don't have a pick yet? They're going to get one here.
Yeah, it was like that. Joe, you were out there for a while and watched them because you're out there with the TV department.
Yeah. And I was going to say, do you guys, from seeing teams in the past and championship teams, do you think it's just that much like it seemed on volleyball and at soccer at times where there wasn't that killer instinct, we didn't have any killers out there that were willing to run somebody down and mow them over? Was it just a lack of killer instinct? Was it just the team being disheartened because they knew they couldn't really advance because of the probation status that they had? Was it the mental side of what the players maybe were experiencing?
Joseph, I think in the last minute or so that we are on here on the Coaches Show, I think you actually hit a chord there. When you look at this season, Mark, we're normally used to guys on the offensive line or the linebackers or even the tight ends. You look at them and you say, oh my gosh, if I was walking down the street and these guys had a beef with me, I would be in some serious trouble, let alone having to go out there and fight against them every single football game, each and every down, multiple times throughout 60 minutes. That's what we were used to in the last 3 years. We were used to guys going out there and saying, I'm coming after you. We didn't necessarily have that this year.
Well, and I think the other thing before we get off the air here that was sort of Our offense was sporadic. I have the gentleman that was on the field with me for every game, Noah Alvarez. Ryan Osborne was out there majority of games. Noah would be saying, well, I don't know why so-and-so's not playing. Ryan would be saying, and even somebody who's not here right now, Corey Nealon would say, I don't know why. And it wasn't that year that when everybody who walked on the field, you felt like, we got spoiled, let's be real honest, from our previous years. We always felt whoever walked on the field, there was a good chance of winning. Noah, more than once, you would say, I wouldn't start. Coaches, let's just be realistic. We're fans, so we're like everybody else. You looked a lot of times and wondered why so-and-so wasn't playing. Ryan, you looked a lot. We didn't have that one group that every time they walked on the field, you knew we were going to be. And let's realize, we did put up a lot of points, but you just didn't feel like they dominated anybody. You said it more than once. Why do you play this guy, not that guy? It was that sort of year.
Yeah, a lot of players to get reps for the Fullerton College football team. Probably have to fix some things out and work things out, but a lot of young players, and if a lot of those players come back next season, we'll expect this Fullerton College football team to be a little bit better next year.
Isn't that right, Corey? Oh, that's right.
No, he hanging out with his boys like Hunter Rice.
Oh,
Okay, so Corey's just hanging out with his guys right after the game.
Is he out there with Brett Hundley?
Yeah, he is. Brett's out there right now looking to see if he can play quarterback. Oh, he never could play quarterback.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
So we want to thank everyone for tuning in to another edition, the season finale here of the Coaches Show.
And before we get off, because I really need to say this, I've been here for 19 years doing sports for Fullerton College, and we do a 145 sports class. It has been my pleasure this year to have the gentleman like Victor who went out and did as many games, sometimes just went out there and stood with us, laughed with the rest of us, because we do a lot of that. Joseph came out and made sure that the soccer games got on the air, decided that he was going to do the championship game, and gave up his weekends to go out there and do the games with the two gentlemen to my left. To Noah Alvarez, who took over the Coaches Show that we do every year, and as the advanced students move on, it's a responsibility to take it over from the producer who previously took it over from me. I want to thank you for doing it. And of course, my partner to my right, I feel like you're 45 years old. You've been around so long. Who's been here every year. We've had a ball growing up together. And yeah, I'm the old guy, but we grew up together every season. For the man who's not here, the magic man, Corey Nealon, it has been a ball. So Victor, thank you. Joe, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing for the program here. For our young man who is the host of the Coaches Show and has grown through the years, thank you, Noah Alvarez. And for my best partner and friend over to my right here, for the hours you put in. That's why we do all of this, because of dedication from the young men I've got to my right and my left here on the show. And I need to thank them, because if it wasn't for them, you wouldn't have seen the games you saw this year. You wouldn't have heard them, you wouldn't have saw them, and you wouldn't have cared about them as much as these gentlemen cared about the teams they called here on 90.1 KBPK and SportsNetUSA.net. Noah? Let's get out of here.
Well, that was well said. Let's go ahead and wrap things up. I'm Noah Alvarez for Victor Vasquez, Joseph Pavlenko, Mark Pavlovich, and Ryan Osborne. Thanks for tuning in to another edition here of the Coaches Show on 90.1 KBPK and SportsNetUSA.net.